Now in this lesson, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Instead of focusing on skin itself, we're actually going to take a look at lips and lip retouching. Now, while we're not necessarily going to focus on particular elements of lip retouching, really getting specific about, fixing the lip line and things like that, I do want to deal with it in the context of like lip skin and how we would deal with things like chapped lips or cracked lips, dry lips. There's just a lot of things that we can fix using a lot of the same techniques that we've covered for the rest of the skin. So we're going to kind of look at that here and take a look at some minor differences that you might utilize for dealing with lips. So we're going to look at two different examples, and I'll kind of show you, really again reiterating a lot of the concepts that we've already covered, but I'll show you how you can kind of deal with certain things using some of these tools. So let's go ahead and we're going to start with this image, and I'm going to create a new layer here. And actually, let's just do a little bit of healing before we get started. So this, again, just like it is with regular skin work, we're going to do a little bit of healing because the first thing we want to do is remove anything that we can remove with a healing brush. So let's go ahead and just kind of remove maybe this little cracked area, maybe in here, this guy here. And in most cases, I would say when I'm dealing with lips, I can usually deal with problems primarily through healing and dodging and burning. That's kind of all I really need to do. But, there are cases where frequency separation might be quite helpful. And I'll show you that in particular in this lesson here. There are cases where it becomes very beneficial to fix certain gaps in texture and things of that nature that are very difficult to do with anything else. If you try and do this with a healing brush or with a patch tool, it doesn't really work. So there's definitely advantages to frequency separation in this context. So I'm just going to go ahead and I think maybe let's just remove a few more of these little lines here, just because they're going to be a little bit more work inside of frequency separation than they would be here. And this is one of those cases where, with enough work, you could probably handle it using dodging and burning, but we're going to look at frequency separation, just how it can help us here. So I'm going to stamp this out, Command Option Shift E or Control Alt Shift E if you're on a PC, and that's just going to create a stamp that I can use for my frequency separation. And once again, we're going to run frequency separation via median. And we have to, again, pick the appropriate radius, which I'm just going to use the down key and kind of keep going down until I find what that appropriate value is. So down here, too much of the texture is going to end up on the low frequency layer. And I think here we're starting to get a little bit better. So I think between probably around 5 or 6 will be good for us here. So let's go with 5. Click OK there. Again, what I want to do is kind of leave the finer texture on high frequency, and a lot of this sort of blotchiness, patchiness, dryness I want to put onto the low frequency layer. So once again, we're going to go into here, grab our brush tool, and at 7% flow rate, fairly small brush. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this one, and we're just going to sort of brush things out. I'm actually going to turn off this layer just so I can see what I'm doing without the texture sort of distracting me here. And again, very important to kind of sample often and work in the direction. Like for example, I don't want to sample here and then brush up and down because you can see that's obviously going to create a problem. So we want to kind of go up and down this way here. So if I sample here, I want to go up and down. If I sample here, I want to go up and down. And you can kind of blend through if you want with, 1 or 2 strokes, but just be careful, again, not to sort of mess up those colors too much. And what we really want to do is just kind of retain the color of the lipstick and maybe cover up these little gaps and spots that exist. So we're going to spend a little bit of time just sort of brushing through this. Again, make sure that you're using a small brush size and sampling often, as we've already harped on you for quite a few times. That's really the key to making sure that this doesn't look bad. Especially, kind of in this area here, we see that there's a slight shadow because the lips kind of indent inwards. So you want to make sure that you preserve that and just kind of work with a small size. And you can see there, I already kind of made a mistake where if I undo, you can see that I painted it too dark there. So just make sure that, again, you're resampling, checking your work over, making sure that you're not ruining anything here. Just trying to get rid of some of this patchiness that exists, making it as smooth as I possibly can. And then especially in here too, we've got a little bit of dryness on the inside of the mouth. And that would be one of those things that would be harder to deal with using a healing brush. So certainly something we want to deal with now if we can. And that's why I like to turn off the high frequency layer, because I kind of know what effect I want here. What we really want is just for this to all blend nicely, look smooth, knowing that all the finer texture is kind of preserved in there, and we just don't need to see it right now because it's ultimately going to prove to be kind of distracting for us. But definitely good to, toggle it on and off every now and then just to see how you're doing. So let's just put it on, off. So you can see we've made some progress. We still have some work to do, but we're kind of getting there. This finer kind of bit of dryness here, I will probably, you should deal with that using the healing brush. So we can do another round of healing after we're done this. But I think let's keep going on this here and just try and make this smooth. So a lot of these kind of cracks in the lips we can deal with here. And this is sort of a matte lip. You can see that there's not really much shine to the lips here because of the matte lipstick. So that tends to be a little bit easier to work with than the high glossy kind of stuff that you saw in that other sample. And I'll show you where the high frequency layer can be really useful for working on lips like those. Might go up a little bit in my brush size just to sort of expedite this process if I can. As you can see, this does unfortunately take a while. That's why good makeup artist is invaluable, but even with a good makeup artist, you're just kind of sometimes stuck with a subject that does not have the best lips. And unfortunately, lips are one of those things that you're sort of limited in what you can do, even as a makeup artist, to make them look good. Because if they're dry, if they're cracked, it's hard to mask it and then still kind of leave a nice texture on the lip itself. The lipstick only covers so much, but the underlying dryness, cracks, they still tend to kind of come through. And oftentimes as a retoucher, you're really stuck with dealing with these kinds of things in post, and definitely good to be aware of them ahead of time because they can take a while to fix. As you can see right now, even in this not so complex case, we certainly have a little bit of work to do on these lips just to make them look a little bit nicer. Okay, we're getting there, I think. Things are looking a little bit smoother here. All right, so let's go ahead and toggle our high frequency layer on. On, off. So certainly a lot better. What we can try and do is fix some of this textural issue here with the spot healing brush. So just make sure that you turn off sample all layers. And let's go ahead and just try and kind of remove some of these little dried blotches. All right, we're getting close, I think, to where I want to be. I mean, obviously we're really zoomed in on this image. Once we zoom out, you probably won't notice any of the remaining issues that are here. Overall, we have improved things quite dramatically. And there's certainly a couple of areas over here I think that we can continue to brush. Make sure we grab the right layer. Want to be on the low layer. So let's just maybe finish just a little bit in here. It doesn't look like it's flowing together quite well. There we go. Okay, and then let's see overall how we're doing here. I think that's pretty good for where we're at. We can finalize a few things with dodging and burning here. So let's just zoom out. On, off. So we've dealt with a lot of that kind of dryness, cracks. We've made it a lot more even as far as the lipstick goes. So let's actually get rid of this layer 3 because there's nothing really on there. And let's go ahead and add a quick dodge and burn stack. So I'm going to use the strong corrective DB just because I know that, I might want to get kind of aggressive with this. And I do encourage that if you're working with lips and you're dodging and burning lips, I would have just a separate stack for dodging and burning lips only, especially if you know you're going to be making very aggressive changes, because oftentimes they end up too saturated after you do a lot of dodging. So you just need to go into here and take the saturation slider down to kind of fix that. And if you're using the same stack as you are for the rest of the skin, that saturation may not work elsewhere. It'll work in the lips, but then it'll over desaturate in different areas. So I would just call it, DB lips, and then just only use that stack for the lips. Let's go ahead and add our helper here so that we can see these issues better. We're going to add a curve and just darken this down a little bit to help us out. And once again, grab a brush, and we're going to go to a 3% flow rate, as we usually do with dodging and burning. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit, and all we really want to do is just kind of smooth out a few more of these areas here. In this case, we don't have a great deal left to do, because we did take care of quite a bit of the problems inside of frequency separation. So I knew that in this corner I still had some things that I had to deal with, but I found it a little bit difficult to deal with inside of frequency separation. So knowing that I'm going to be dodging and burning anyways, I can just always fix them up after the fact. It was really just kind of luminosity based patches, so they were easy to fix with dodge and burn. So right now I'm just burning in a few areas. Just trying to again get things nice and smooth. And obviously the more you zoom in and work on these finer lines, the smoother everything will look. But there's a certain point beyond which it just doesn't make sense. And a certain point too where you actually start to go too far and you lose a little bit of the texturing that's in the lips. And you do want some lines in there, some natural lines, because that's just, the body would have those. A person's lips has lines in them. So if you try and remove it completely and make it this really, really smooth surface, it starts to look a little bit fake. So it's a matter of really finding a good balance between everything. And then I think one more round with some burning here. Okay, and let's zoom out just a little bit more, because sometimes we find things zoomed out that we wouldn't otherwise see, and I think that looks pretty good. So let's just do one more check zoomed in. I think there's a couple of little spots that we can maybe make a little softer, just these darker lines that are in here. Inside of here, we probably have a couple of little spots that we could have dealt with, but once again, at that zoom level we were just looking at, you don't notice them, so it's really up to you whether you want to spend the time to make all of that perfect. Just a little bit of maybe healing on the high frequency layer inside of here would have helped with that as well, but I don't think we need to go that far. You kind of get the idea of how you would remove that if you needed to. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. Let's go ahead and just zoom out. Turn this off, and then if we toggle all of our layers on and off, we can kind of see what we've got. So everything is just kind of nice and smooth, more refined, and that is sort of what we want on a matte lip. Now moving on to this one, we're going to look at a couple of different approaches, because what we're really dealing with here are these sort of gaps that we have, and that happens quite often when we have that glossier lipstick, and also when we're dealing with harder light. This was shot with fairly soft light, so we don't have any sort of, well, I mean, the light is soft on this side, it's hard light coming in from the back, but of course anything that's on this side is sort of reflected light, reflected very soft, and therefore we're not picking up any real highlights here, whereas on this one, we definitely see those highlights, and some of these gaps sometimes are a little bit, too large, they're a little uneven, so we want to even some of that out. And like I said, doing that with something like the healing brush or spot healing brush never really looks right, it never really gets you where you want to be. So we need to take a different approach in this particular case. So the first thing we're going to do is grab our blank layer and a spot healing brush. So we'll select that and make sure we check off sample all layers now that we're working on a blank layer. And let's go ahead and clean up what we can on the lips here, just some of this spotting that's here. Let's try and get rid of it, because obviously, the less we have to do in frequency separation, the better. And let's say we try and remove something like this. Now, oftentimes what happens, see, if we try and remove that patch, we kind of just get a patch that is better, but in a sense worse, because the texture that was filled in is not the right texture. So I'm going to just go ahead and remove that, or I should say restore that based on what I just healed out. We're going to just leave it, and we'll see what we can do with it later with frequency separation, and particularly the high frequency layer this time. Let's go ahead and kind of just remove these little bits on the inside. And sometimes when we get these gaps here too, oftentimes if they're small like they are here, we can sometimes remove them with a spot healing brush. In this case, it still creates a little bit of a gap, but it's not too bad. Now over here, if I try and remove this one, you can see it just kind of still leaves a gap there. So there's no point in really fixing that. It doesn't really look any better. So if we're kind of stuck in the situation where we can't fix some of these problems with a healing brush, and certainly when it comes to, a textural problem, we're not really going to fix it with dodging and burning, because I can't really dodge in a highlight in this gap. It's just going to lighten what's there, but it's not going to look like a highlight. So that's where frequency separation becomes a little bit more helpful. So let's just see what we can do with it. So first thing we're going to do now, once again, stamp everything out, Command-Option-Shift-E. We're going to create our frequency separation stack. And let's go ahead and again, just kind of work with something reasonable here. So I think probably in our case, I'm going to go with 5 again for this particular image. And let's just zoom in and see what we can do with a little bit of frequency separation. So I'm going to go ahead and try and deal with this issue. So let's just grab a little graft. So we did this earlier when we were working with a dark skin. So we're going to try it again, and I'm going to just grab a section that looks pretty good. Now, it's obviously not perfect. It's got this little patch here, which we can remove later, which is fine. So Command or Control J, and then Option or Alt to clip down, and then the V key to move it. Then we're going to move it right into here. And we can also, what I would encourage you to do is hit the Command T, and that gives you the transform tools. And that allows you to just kind of adjust it, because it's coming down at this angle here. And as we come through, you can see that that angle needs to change. So if we, for example, move this patch onto the other side, we'd have to really rotate it, kind of this way in order for it to make sense. So what we want to do is just kind of adjust it so it matches the angle that the lips are flowing through. So we can just paste that in there. And then obviously we have a low frequency issue here. So we can just grab our brush and let's go back to 7%. 7%, there we go. And let's make it a little bit smaller. So let's sample some color here, something darker, and sort of paint over this. And obviously we got some little issues here, so let's just grab our spot healing brush, remove sample all layers, and just kind of heal out this line here. And then we can do that on this layer here. This is where we kind of originally grabbed it from. So if that bothers you, just get rid of it there. Same with these little guys. We can kind of tidy them all up. And same with this. If we want to use any of this texture, maybe we can fix some of these gaps. We're going to do some more grafting over here to maybe try and fill some of these gaps that exist. So let's go ahead and grab a lasso tool once again. I'm just going to try and deal with this area that's here. So we can grab, maybe this side is looking a lot better. Let's grab a little bit more of that, and Command or Control J, once again, Option or Alt. And then what I'm going to do is Command T for the transform tools, and I'm going to just try and flip this horizontally. And then we're just going to drag it to this side here and maybe just rotate it slightly. So something like that. And if you don't want it to look replicated, again, we can grab our mask. So let's add a mask here, black brush, and we can mask out certain areas. So let's see what we can conceivably mask out. So I think down here, there wasn't a real issue, so we can kind of remove it. Let's remove this little distinguishing spot because it looks pretty similar as it did. And then maybe just a little bit over here to sort of blend in. Something like that. And now it doesn't quite look as replicated. Maybe just soften this guy down a little bit as well. And then what we'll need to do is, I think, fix a little bit of the coloring in there. So let's go to low frequency, grab our brush once again, and we're going to just lighten this part slightly, just so that it makes sense. Wherever you have like a textural highlight, make sure that it's light underneath, like the low frequency layer is light as well, because otherwise it doesn't kind of match up with the color that's there below it. Okay, so let's zoom out now and just kind of toggle it on and off. And you can see that we've made a few corrections there that I think immediately look a lot better. This area is perhaps a little bit too light, so let's just kind of fix that. All right, so obviously we've got a few more gaps that we need to deal with. We need to deal with some of this up here. We need to deal with some of this here, and maybe a little bit down here. And then we've got some dryness over here. So that's an exercise I think I'm gonna leave for you. Really what I wanted to kind of show you here is, again, how we utilize the high frequency layer in this case, just like we did with the dark skin example where we fixed, sort of bad areas of skin texture. We're doing the same thing here on the lips, just using much finer fragments. Again, kind of sampling something that's close, transforming it, nudging it where we need to, and making sure that whatever is on the low layer sort of matches that as well. So if I'm taking a patch that is a highlight patch and I'm moving it over an area that was dark originally, so let's say, for example, that if we turn this off and turn off our low frequency layer, so we see that this area was kind of dark down here, as was this one. So that's why I had to paint it lighter now to match the texture that was a highlight texture. So it's always a two-step process when you're working with lips, whereas skin, it's a little bit less so because, we're kind of matching, we're picking a piece of texture that is a similar luminosity underneath, whereas here we're really sampling, a bit of texture that is a highlight and covering over something that wasn't a highlight before. So you got to make sure that when you do that, you match the luminosity value properly in that low frequency layer. So I think that kind of gives you a good idea of how that works, and obviously different areas that you need to target. You can certainly use the same technique. Again, just sample, transform, paint underneath, and the process just kind of continues. So with those two transformations, we can just kind of see that it did really make a pretty substantial difference from where we started, even though all we really did was just copy 2 bits of texture and painted a little bit underneath of them. So sometimes small adjustments like that can make a pretty substantial difference. So I do encourage you to try this yourself, just kind of undo everything I've done here and just grab those bits of texture, move them around, play with them, transform them, and just make sure that you can get to a similar result. Ultimately, again, it just really boils down to the same techniques that we've covered over these last couple of lessons, applied with a slight little difference, and obviously selecting the right radius to begin with.